I was perhaps a bit harsh in my retrospective of Series 2, but I hope that my love for this show, even in its weaker moments, still comes across. With this in mind, I want to take this opportunity whilst ranking these episodes to highlight the many small moments that I enjoy in Series 2. Not every episode is good, and I have my favourites, but over the course of this video, I hope to demonstrate that even the worst episodes have something to offer. Well, most of them anyway. Fear Her is an easy target, and I don't want to be too mean here. Writer Matthew Graham claimed that he received letters from children who loved his episode and argued that it wasn't intended for older audiences. I can appreciate that, and whilst this was never a favourite of mine, I remember enjoying it enough as a kid, but coming back to it now, it really is a misfire. The Doctor and Rose are at their annoying worst, the setting is boring and ugly, and the plot feels as paper thin as, well, paper. It's just so bland, which in a way is worse than if it were genuinely offensive. The problems with it aren't grotesque enough to make for any kind of exciting criticism. It doesn't even have a solid premise that could offer a tantalizing idea of what could have been. A scared alien who utilizes imagination as an energy source is mildly interesting, but this concept is never fully explored. The role of Chloe Webber probably demanded a better performance, but poor child acting is unfortunately to be expected and hardly something to get angry about. If the episode has one saving grace, then it's the performance of Abdul Salis as the man from the council. The joke gets old pretty quickly, but in an episode this dour, I'll take anything. I wish every pothole was fixed as quickly as this one was. Is it surprising that Love and Monsters isn't at the bottom of this list? I'm genuinely asking, by the way. This episode has been a punching bag for ages, but I always got the impression that the animosity had lessened over the last few years. I don't think people are heralding it as a misunderstood masterpiece, and I'm certainly not doing that, but unlike Fear Her, it is at least entertaining. I like Elton. He's a charismatic character, he feels real, the performance is good, and the video diary format is an interesting change of pace, for the time at least. A secret society dedicated to finding the Doctor is a good idea, and I like that it degenerates into more of a social club. Linda have a nice group dynamic, and I will never get tired of Bliss trying to explain what the Doctor definitely doesn't represent. I think the mistake here was forcing the Absorbaloff into the story. I like Peter Kay as a comedian, and to be fair to him, he gives the only performance you could give with this character and this script, but he is not funny or menacing at all. His presence gives the episode a certain so bad it's good quality, which maybe was the best it could have hoped for. As much as I think that Elton and Ursula are likeable, their actual plot was pretty underdeveloped, and Kay's inclusion does at least make this a memorable watch, but for the most part, it's memorable for all the wrong reasons. The Scooby-Doo intro is ridiculous, the cheapness is blaringly obvious, and it all ends with Elton suggesting that he has sex with a pavement slab. I won't go as far as saying that this episode is good, but I do think that its flaws are far more noticeable when you compare it with the two Doctor Light episodes that followed it. You look at Blink and Turn Left, and this episode feels almost criminal by comparison. But even when this unfortunate juxtaposition is considered, there's not much to write home about here. A group of likeable characters and a great subplot with Jackie isn't enough to save this one. On paper, New Earth is a great idea. The concept of a hospital breeding a new species of human to collect and cure various diseases is brilliant, which makes it frustrating when the story instead focuses on the hijinks of a certain bitchy trampoline. I know I mentioned in the last ranking that Cassandra was something of a guilty pleasure, but I can't say that I was clamouring to see her again. Cassandra's plan involves placing her consciousness into Rose, and the resultant body swapping is a source of much of the comedy here. A large portion of the episode revolves around it, and while some individual lines are kind of enjoyable, I can't say I'm proud of myself when I crack a smile at the Doctor beating out a samba. Okay, that one is kind of funny, I'll give them that. It does get old quite quickly though. I think the bigger issue of the body swapping subplot is that it necessitates a cliched sequence of plot developments. You have Cassandra pretending to be Rose and doing an obviously terrible job, but initially fooling the Doctor, who then later reveals that he knew all along. Who would have thought it? Given that this is Tennant's first proper episode as the Doctor, it's an odd choice to have him be someone else for much of the runtime. It also makes the ending feel even more tacked on, as if they needed a big moment to introduce the new Doctor after wasting him for the previous 35 minutes. It's like trying to copy Everybody Lives without putting in the required groundwork to make a moment like that feel earned and not completely empty. It's a poor introduction to this Doctor and easily the worst series opener of the first RTD era. The cat people look good though. The Idiot's Lantern should be a disaster. It has a mundane setting, it relies heavily on the forced chemistry between the Doctor and Rose, and the villain is a sentient TV program that pulls people's faces off. And yet, despite it containing almost everything I complained about in my retrospective video, I always enjoy this story. In fact, I nearly placed it higher on the list. I think I just like Mark Gatiss' writing and his characters. His enthusiasm is infectious and endearing, and it bleeds into a story like this. Much like The Unquiet Dead, it takes a cosy British setting and presents a romanticised version of it, complete with a silly monster for the Doctor to defeat. It's not clever or particularly groundbreaking, but it is very entertaining. I love Maureen Lipman's scenery-chewing performance as The Wire, and Jamie Foreman is similarly perfect as Mr. Connolly. He's a character you love to hate, and his comeuppance at the end is incredibly satisfying. I know some people have an issue with Rose persuading Tommy to go to his father at the end, but I think it fits with Rose's character given her own trauma surrounding the death of her father. It's a story that's very enjoyable on a basic level. The goodies are nice, the baddies are wicked, and everyone gets what's coming to them by the end. It's simple, cozy, and very enjoyable, and whilst I would hesitate to call it a great episode, it's one that I return to again and again. Army of Ghosts and Doomsday are a pair of messy episodes, but despite not coming together as well as, say, The Idiot's Lantern, they do still contain lots to enjoy. I placed them where I did to reward the things that they both get right, like the tense build-up of the first part and the numerous small moments of excitement in the finale. Army of Ghosts has a pretty great premise, with the intrigue generated by the ghosts maintained as more of the plot is revealed. Torchwood itself takes a slightly predictable shape, having seen it in action during the Christmas invasion, but it's still exciting to explore the institution, and Yvonne Hartman is a good representative for this incarnation of the organisation. The Sphere is another wonderfully odd idea, and the eventual reveal of the Daleks makes for an intoxicating cliffhanger. The second part is weaker, but it still contains several likeable moments. The initial visit to Pete's world is eerie, the conversation in the corridor is funny, Jackie's reunion with Pete is heartwarming, and this scene of the Cyberman on the TV still creeps me out, almost as much as it did when I was a kid. Tennant's performance is a bit erratic and not always convincing, but I do love it when he tells the Daleks that he won't open the Ark. Although I like these individual scenes, the story itself is far from perfect. The first episode begins with an incredibly melodramatic monologue from Rose, and the conclusion to the plot feels very rushed given the strength of the build-up. The scene on the beach doesn't really make me feel anything, but I can still appreciate that both David Tennant and Billie Piper put in a great performance. It's an iconic scene, just not an overly compelling one. For all the excitement generated in part 1, the plot does contain a fair amount of fan service, which makes me wonder if any ending could pay off such an exaggerated premise. Would a huge, hour-long battle feel too predictable? Would it be a loving homage to pulp sci-fi, like a story from an old TV annual, or would it feel like a blur of bad CGI that wasted its roster of villains? In a way, the decision to focus on the drama of the Doctor and Rose's relationship is a smart one, subverting expectations and prioritising character-driven storytelling. It's just a shame that the relationship itself feels so empty. The big emotional moments mostly fall flat as a result, but I don't think this is enough to sink the entire story. The excitement never surpasses that of the cliffhanger, but I still think there's a lot to enjoy if you're willing to sift through everything else. If there was ever a story that did everything right on paper, but somehow didn't grab me like others did, then it's The Impossible Planet and the Satan Pit. I know it's good, and I can see its strengths clearly. This is a powerhouse of a base under siege story. The satanic element is especially fascinating and the best part of the story, but I could have done with slightly more of it. I think the idea of the beast is more compelling than the actual creature, at least in the form he takes during part 2. The faceless voice and the cave paintings are incredibly creepy, almost too creepy, because the giant monster reveal doesn't quite do justice to the tension that had been building up. The Ood are also an inspired creation, but they become stock enemies pretty quickly, and it's not until Series 4 that they're given a story worthy of their potential. Overall, The Impossible Planet and The Satan Pit have a lot going for it. It's a solid example of formulaic Doctor Who honed to perfection, but it never becomes more than a superlative throwback adventure. It's an extremely competent story, but if it lacks the rough edges of other stories, then it also lacks the smaller moments that make other episodes stand out more, in my mind. Series 2 features several throwbacks, but no episode leans more heavily into nostalgia than School Reunion. It's an episode that rests almost entirely on the returning character of Sarah Jane Smith, and could have easily ended up as nothing more than a cheap publicity stunt. But this was a gamble that paid off, resulting in one of the warmest and most nostalgic episodes of the entire show. Sarah Jane is obviously one of the most iconic characters from the classic series, but I think it's equally important that Elizabeth Sladen was one of its best actors too. She really is great in this episode, so it's a shame that a large part of her dialogue revolves around jealousy and lame romantic jokes. The two companions do at least make up by the end, but it's still a little cringeworthy to hear some of those lines. Sladen's still great though, and she's not the only standout either. Tennant's joy at seeing Sarah Jane is infectious, and their reunion later in the episode is one of the best moments of the entire series. Anthony Head is also wonderful to watch, and he gives a gloriously villainous performance as Mr. Finch. He delivers his lines with such relish and turns a potentially silly story into more of a fun pantomime. School Reunion succeeds on a basic level, being very entertaining, but it also manages to successfully and blatantly evoke nostalgia, which the show had been more hesitant to do only a year before. It does this by infusing a returning character from the classic show with the best aspect of the revival: compelling drama. However disappointing the conflict is between Rose and Sarah Jane, the conversations between Sarah Jane and the Doctor are fantastic, and they allow this episode to essentially have it both ways. It's a fun adventure with the Doctor, Sarah Jane and K9, but also a look at the emotional impact of being left behind and abandoned by someone you would never want to leave. Sarah Jane Smith was already one of the best things about the classic show, but with this episode, she became a highlight of the revival series too. Even if it's not as strong as Dalek from the previous series, Rise of the Cybermen and Age of Steel is equally successful at reintroducing their titular villains as new series regulars. It also examines the Cybermen with a level of detail and emotional resonance not seen again until World Enough in Time. The scene of the Doctor and Mrs. Moore consoling a Cyberman converted from a bride on her wedding day is incredibly powerful, despite its short length, and the industrial scale of the conversion process is still gruesome to comprehend. This shot of the Cyberman helmet used to really scare me as a kid. I think it was on the Trailer Maker too. Did anyone used to make trailers on the Doctor Who website? It doesn't matter. Anyway, back to the episode. There are still a few aspects that hinder the story. The subplot with Mickey and Ricky is a bit silly, and the idea of Pete Tyler being alive feels like a weak attempt to reproduce the emotional resonance of Father's Day with little success. But most of these elements are at least limited to part 1. It makes for a slow build-up, but the payoff is a tense and well-structured second part. The end result is a showstopper of a story that far outstrips the actual finale of the series in terms of quality and cohesion. When given the right material, I think the Cybermen are the most interesting villain that the show has, and this is a story that understands their potential. It's not perfect, but there's more than enough good material to enjoy with this one. You look at Tooth and Claw on paper, and yeah, it seems pretty basic. It's a runaround with a monster in a historical setting. It's a premise that the show has done countless times. But every trope is demonstrated so effectively that nothing here feels boring or repetitive. Instead, it's fun and exciting, and the end result is one of the most broadly entertaining episodes of the entire show. Pauline Collins in particular gives a great performance as Queen Victoria. It's one of my favourite depictions of a historical figure in the show. It's a character that gives her the scope to be both melancholy and entertaining, or should that be amusing? Much like Collins, the whole episode strikes the perfect balance between two extremes, juggling both nostalgia and tension without ever dropping the ball. The setting is romantic and beautifully realised, much like The Unquiet Dead from the previous series. Once again, the BBC demonstrates its proficiency with historical drama. But the tension is also very palpable, especially once the monster appears. The werewolf is a scary creature in part because it's something that can't be reasoned with, and the score and the various distorted POV shots all work together to create a genuinely unnerving atmosphere. The Doctor and Rose display genuine chemistry throughout. The episode incorporates real-world concepts like Queen Victoria being a carrier of haemophilia, and they even have time to set up the Torchwood Institute. Victoria may not be amused, but after watching this episode, I sure was. When I made my retrospective video on Series 2, I found myself constantly having to qualify all of my generalizations. It was hard to make broad statements about this set of episodes because within this series of throwbacks and formulas, there existed one of the most original and unique stories in this entire show. Much like in Moffat's previous story, there is so much about the girl in the fireplace that shouldn't work, but somehow everything comes together in practice. The mystery is slow to unfold, but also laden with immediately striking visual imagery and narrative developments. The plot manages to provide a satisfying explanation for all of the strange scenarios that occur throughout the episode, and it's all tied together with that kicker of a final reveal, the name of the ship. The combination of a futuristic space station and pre-revolutionary France makes for a strange pairing, but the contrast of such opposing settings brings out the beauty in both of them. This space station feels memorable, no mean feat when you consider how many space stations have featured in this show. Maybe it's because it contains a horse or a human eye, but I think the magic of the premise bleeds into this otherwise mundane location. The French setting is also wonderfully realised. The set design is fantastic and the clockwork robots are absolutely stunning to look at. Every time I watch this story, I'm shocked by how inventive it is and how successfully all of these strange elements come together to form something so cohesive. The dialogue is equally successful. The Doctor tells the clockwork robot that he's not winding it up, and it's somehow not just a cheap pun, but a genuinely poetic line delivered with absolute sincerity from Tennant. I seriously love that line, one of my favourite moments of the series. The idea of the Doctor as someone's imaginary friend is such a magical one. It's something that Moffat would obviously return to once he became showrunner, but it's interesting to see it here with a more egotistical incarnation. Tennant's actions during the climax of the episode suggests that the attention from Renette has gone to his head. I also like the romantic subplot between the Doctor and the adult Madame de Pompadour because it makes the best use of the already existing romantic tension between the Doctor and Rose. There's an underlying jealousy and sense of dejection within Rose, which mirrors how Mickey feels about her and the Doctor's sadness at the end exists alongside the memory of his dismissiveness towards Rose throughout the episode. This is a character who likes to show off and likes the attention from people he shows off to. Tennant's Doctor displays a cocky overconfidence with a hint of narcissism, but never so much that you turn against him. It's characterization done right, and it makes for a refreshingly subtle conflict between the two leads. The Girl in the Fireplace is a beautiful creation. It's romantic, funny, bittersweet, and incredibly charming, and it's my pick for the best episode of Series 2. Thanks for watching this ranking video. Let me know in the comments whether you agree with my placing and how you would have ranked these episodes differently. I'd be really interested to hear it. And if you really hated my list, then don't worry, because there's bound to be a parallel universe where your favourite is at number 1.